All right, we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good morning. There's a very funny thing about the good mornings or good day. I'm on the City Planning Commission, and whenever someone comes up and says good afternoon, good morning, we always make a concerted effort to respond now. And it's nice. It's a nice way to greet. In any event, I'm Anthony Crowell. I'm the Dean and President here at New York Law School. I'm also the faculty director of our Center for New York City and State Law, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you. We're so excited to host Congressman Dan Goldman today as he speaks on democracy on the brink, corruption, and public trust. As New York's law school for the past 134 years, we've engaged on the key legal and policy matters affecting New York and on matters relating to democracy, civic participation, and ethics. And we're also a proud civic institution in the Tribeca community, serving as a partner, resource, and convener to small businesses, legal organizations, and regular New Yorkers. Our location within the 10th Congressional District also makes us Congressman Goldman's constituents, and therefore we are honored to have him here today and see the work and types of discussions that happen regularly here at the law school. Leading our public service engagement is the Center for New York City and State Law, originally founded over 30 years ago by the Samuel Seabury Professor of Law, Ross Sandler. As our regular attendees know, Ross usually serves as our host and master of ceremonies, and he introduces our speaker. However, he is on a well-earned sabbatical writing a book, and he is focusing very appropriately on the topic of public corruption. So he will return in the fall, and we look forward to hearing about his work. As the Center's faculty director, I'm proud to lead many of our civic engagement efforts in partnership with veteran journalist Ben Max, the Center's executive editor and program director, as well as Stephen Lewis, who is our counsel, and many other staff, including Veronica Rose and Rose White, and Jeff Weiss, who is, as we say, the Dean of Election Law. This program is taking place at a time where there is such a sense and feeling that our democracy is being tested more so by the day than ever. The rule of law, the role of higher education, and the very practice of law have been under enormous scrutiny and strain. That is why it is so appropriate to have Congressman Goldman speak here today on our campus, a proud and impactful standalone law school that has served the community for well over a century. The cornerstone of our constitutional democracy is the rule of law, which has allowed our society to be dynamic yet stable, to be free yet accountable, and to be committed to equal justice through the pursuit of difficult yet essential truths. The rule of law means that no one is above the law and no one is beneath its protection. And holding those in power accountable and upholding ethical conduct and combating corruption are central to a well-functioning democracy as well. And as we understand the history of our nation, we look and understand that we have always been one where smart and forceful leaders who are responsible stewards of the law can make change and ensure that the rule of law protects the full spectrum of rights and dignity to which every single person is entitled. With that in mind, once again, we're honored to be joined by the Congressman and are eager to hear his perspectives. I will ask Ben to come to the podium and formally introduce him and begin today's program. Ben?
All right. Good morning, everybody. I'll be brief. We know you want to hear from the Congressman. Thank you, Dean Crowell. Thank you all for being here. And for those watching the live stream or watching or listening at a later date, as the Dean mentioned, I'm Ben Max, Program Director at the Center for New York City and State Law here at New York Law School. This is a really great turnout, and we are all here, of course, to hear from Representative Dan Goldman of New York's 10th Congressional District for our 199th CityLaw Breakfast. Thank you again, Congressman, for being here. He'll speak today on democracy on the brink, corruption, and the public trust. A quick thank you to our team at the center, especially Veronica Rose and Rose White, who make these events happen, as well as the events, marketing, security, AV, and other teams here at NYLS. And another moment of recognition, of course, for Professor Sandler himself, a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District, and he will be back with us in the fall for our 200th CityLaw Breakfast. So stay tuned for an invitation to that. And thank you to our breakfast sponsors, Con Edison, Greenberg Traurig, and Verizon. We at the Center for New York City and State Law, of course, focus on city and state law, but we recognize the importance of the federal government and our federal representatives from the city. And it's especially pivotal time here where the impact of decision-making in Washington is being felt in our city and state. Congressman Goldman has held his seat in the still relatively newly drawn 10th Congressional District since January 2023. He won a very competitive Democratic primary back in 2022 that many here might remember and have voted in. And he went on to easily win in that general election and re-election in 2024. The district includes Lower Manhattan and a big stretch of Brooklyn. I won't list all the neighborhoods, but hopefully we have many constituents here. It's a very interesting district. And of course is home to New York Law School, as the dean mentioned. Congressman Goldman is an attorney, a graduate of Yale College and Stanford Law School. He spent a decade as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, where he focused on organized crime and white-collar prosecutions, conducting and supervising hundreds of investigations involving racketeering, murder, money laundering, gun trafficking, narcotics, and other offenses, as well as securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, tax fraud, and other white-collar crime. From 2012 to 2014, the congressman was deputy chief of the Organized Crime Unit, and from 2014 to 2017, he served as senior trial counsel in the Securities and Commodities Fraud Task Force. Before running for office, Congressman Goldman served as lead counsel in the first impeachment of then-President Donald Trump over the president's attempts to leverage Ukraine for his own political ends, during which Congressman Goldman directed the strategy of the investigation, led the closed depositions, and the questioning of witnesses during the Intelligence Committee's open hearings. He oversaw the drafting and publication of the Select Committee's 300-page report on the investigation, entitled the Trump-Ukraine Impeachment Inquiry Report, and he presented the report in testimony before the House Judiciary Committee, served as lead counsel for the House impeachment managers during the Senate trial. As a member of the House of Representatives, he's worked on many issues, including, of course, what he will talk about here today, but also almost you name it, immigration reform and protections, gun violence prevention, disaster prevention and relief, protecting funding for public broadcasting, very much in the news recently, and much more. When he ran for Congress, Congressman Goldman focused his campaign in part on strengthening and protecting democracy, and he will speak on that theme here today. Congressman?
Thanks very much, Ben. It's great to see you here. I will always remember Ben was the moderator of one of the very first forums we had in the primary 3 years ago. We were just reminiscing. Thank you, Dean Crowell, for having me. I know Professor Sandler is on sabbatical, but I saw Josie, who's representing the family. Thank you and your family for all the great work. And of course, Professor Sandler has the most important pedigree one could have, a former AUSA in the Southern District of New York. And appreciate all of you coming here today, as I'm going to dive into a slightly different angle of the attacks on the rule of law and democracy. I think we all can agree that the very foundations of our democracy are enduring a stress test right now. And we're facing threats abroad from Russia, Iran, China. We have partisan gridlock in Washington that makes it incredibly difficult to govern this country as the framers intended. But I'm not referring to those challenges. Those are ones that our nation has grappled with and conquered many times over the past 250 years. We are facing something far more insidious, something that corrodes government from within and is a far more significant and existential threat to the future of our republic. And that threat, at its core, is naked, unbridled, and brazen corruption at the highest levels of our government. Now, as many know here, in so many ways, our founding fathers anticipated so many of the obstacles and pitfalls that our democracy might face when they drafted the Constitution. And they included what I think is perhaps the most brilliant part of the Constitution, which is the concept of separation of powers, and that three branches of government would naturally provide the necessary checks and balances to preserve and protect the will of the people. Now, Article 1 confers on Congress the power of the purse and the power to declare war. Article 2 requires the executive branch to faithfully execute the laws passed by Congress and to oversee foreign relations. And Article 3 requires the judiciary with saying what the law is, properly insulated from political influence and pressure by lifetime tenure. Now, this, at the time, daring and innovative structure, I think presupposed two assumptions that, if lacking, would crater the entire system. First, that members of one branch or of each branch of government would prioritize naturally their own power and authority over pure tribalism. And second, that the President of the United States would unconditionally believe in the validity and authority of the Constitution. And sadly, we are witnessing a combination of these two conditions that has our government teetering on the brink. No president, not even President Nixon, has so disregarded the law and the Constitution as Donald Trump routinely does. And I can think of no majority in the Congress that has so completely turned over all of its own power and authority to a different branch of government as this Republican Congress is doing to President Trump. But, and this is what I want to focus on, this inflection point that we're at did not come out of the blue. It didn't come out of nowhere. We can have, and we do have, many laws, many institutions that are designed to uphold our rule of law and our democratic values. But if the American people do not have trust in those laws and those institutions, and if they do not have faith that the laws will be fairly and equally applied, or that the institutions are placing the public good over anyone's personal or individual interest, then those laws are not worth the paper they're written on, and the institutions are not worth the dilapidated buildings that they reside in. And sadly, trust in elected representatives is at an all-time low. The National Election Study has been tracking public trust in government since 1958, when the percentage of Americans who said they trust the government to do what is right just about always or most of the time was 73%. In 1964, it was 77%. Today, that number stands at 22%. And only 2% of respondents say they trust the government to do what is right just about always. 2%. Since 2007, the share of Americans saying that they trust the government has not broken 30%. And while I'll be the first to say that Donald Trump has taken official corruption to new lows, he is only able to do that because of the erosion of the public trust that has been underway for years by both parties, and very often, especially here in New York. Now, as the lead counsel in the first impeachment of President Trump for corruptly abusing his official power to try to coerce a foreign government to help his own personal political campaign, very little that Donald Trump does surprises me. But if there is anything that does, it is not that he is engaged in widespread abuse of power for personal gain, but rather how openly and brazenly he is doing it. Let's take just a couple of examples, recent time. A few weeks ago, President Trump accepted a reported $400 million luxury jet from the royal family of Qatar without the consent of Congress. A clear, plain, obvious violation of the Foreign Emoluments Clause, which says that Congress must consent to any foreign gift, title, or emolument. And just so you have some perspective about how this clause has been treated in the past, in 1877, President Ulysses Grant requested consent from Congress to receive and accept the Statue of Liberty from France. And as far as I know, the Statue of Liberty was never going to be sent to President Grant's presidential library after he left office. President Trump has openly bragged about that plane, and he did it just a couple days after he announced a $2 billion financial deal with a UAE-backed investment company in connection to a crypto stablecoin that was recently issued by a relatively new crypto company that Donald Trump is the principal shareholder of. This deal yielded him hundreds of millions of dollars, and he literally announced it on his first official international trip of this term. And he's grifting here at home too. He sold 25 VIP White House tours to the top 25 shareholders of this crypto company without any known national security vetting. And that saw the shares of his company go up by 50%. And yesterday, the Senate voted on stablecoin legislation that very well may make it to the Resolute desk for Donald Trump's signature. That's right. He may be soon asked to sign legislation that has a direct impact on his own financial interests. If there is not a conflict of interest and corruption in government, beyond that, I don't know what there could be. Now, remember, in the first term, when the public was outraged that he only ceased his day-to-day involvement in the Trump organization and that he didn't divest his interest. It seems quaint now that that was the debate, because now he is soliciting foreign investments, he is selling White House tours, and there isn't a hint of an investigation from the Department of Justice nor from the Republican majority in Congress. Now, why is that? Perhaps some of the reasons for such little outrage can be summed up in a statement that I hear all the time. Oh, every politician is corrupt. Too many people have simply come to accept the expectation that elected officials are corrupt, and some way, somehow, every politician is making money from his or her office. And as frustrated as I get hearing it over and over, it's hard to argue with. Just look here in New York. Our current mayor was charged last year for alleged honest services fraud, the public corruption statute, and campaign finance violations tied to foreign money and influence. And while, from my legal perspective as a former prosecutor, I think that the legal basis for that corruption charge was suspect, I couldn't help but notice that the most common conversation I had with people about the indictment was not lamenting the conduct, but was really the question, is what he did really worthy of a federal indictment? In other words, the expectations are so low for politicians that some degree of corruption is expected and accepted. So much so that federal charges should be saved for only the most egregious conduct, not just any conduct that violates the law. And those who believe that are sadly in good company. The Supreme Court also seems to believe that that is what the law requires. The running joke nowadays is that in order to be convicted of federal corruption charges, the FBI needs to find gold bars in your closet. That, of course, is what happened to former Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey, a Democrat, who was convicted of honest services fraud here in the Southern District of New York after accepting gold bars in exchange for a variety of official actions taken on behalf of the Egyptian and other foreign governments, which was responsible for giving him the gold bars. Now, we can understandably be frustrated that the Supreme Court has repeatedly narrowed the reach of federal corruption law. But in their mind, it's not actually a close call. It's unanimous. Just about every single ruling on honest services fraud, from the McDonald case to the present, has been unanimous, 9-0. That includes the Buffalo Billions case related to Joe Percoco here in New York, and it required both then State Majority Leader Dean Skelos and then Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver to be retried for corruption charges before they were each ultimately convicted. The fact of the matter is that both Democrats and Republicans have repeatedly succumbed to personal greed over the public good. And while Donald Trump is taking it to a new level and is attacking all forms of political accountability and is doing it openly and notoriously, including by weaponizing the Department of Justice to reward his allies and punish his enemies, the stage had long ago been set for a wannabe dictator like him to come along and take a battering ram to the rule of law that had already been fraying at the edges for some time. Now, the damage to our system goes far beyond any individual case or any tragic fall. It goes to the very foundation of our democracy. Democracy depends on a basic understanding that we, the people, entrust elected officials with power in exchange for their service for the public good. But that trust is not a given. It must be earned. And when those in power use their positions to enrich themselves, to favor their allies, or to punish their enemies, that social contract begins to dissolve. And that broken trust is, in my view, what has paved the way for the resurrection of the current resident of the White House, who was charged in 4 different indictments for 3 different criminal schemes and convicted for effectively cheating in the 2016 election. But he has turned this suspicion of our elected officials into a toxic cynicism. He has converted facts into the subject of partisan debate. He has used distrust in the system to frame himself as that system's victim. The question is no longer asked whether politicians are true to their oaths of office. It is instead a question of moral relativism. Is she as bad as he is? Or vice versa. And once the average voter believes that all politicians are corrupt, that no facts can be trusted, that the pursuit of power justifies any means necessary, the foundations of our democracy crumble, and we invite a dangerous new normal, where truth is optional, ethics are flexible, and accountability is partisan. Now, there are many things to be concerned about these days. We are dealing with so many threats to the rule of law and our basic foundational democratic values and institutions. But I firmly believe that the path towards restoring faith in our government, in this great experiment that we call democracy, must start by addressing this public corruption. And that is not only through revising our criminal statutes, but it's also through altering the structure of our electoral system. So before I end, after that uplifting recitation of the current state of distrust in our system, I'm going to propose a couple of ideas and solutions that I think can help to restore confidence in our elected officials and, by extension, in our government. First, voters must see a renewed commitment to ethical government from candidates for office. Donald Trump has normalized the once heretic idea that the President of the United States does not believe in the Constitution. That must end, and it must end now. Not just by following the law, but by holding politicians to a higher standard. And that includes those within one's own party. It frustrates me to no end when I hear people say that some alleged misconduct is okay because the official was not criminally charged or convicted. That is not the standard that we should hold each other to. A criminal conviction, as I know from 10 years trying to pursue them, is an incredibly high standard. 12 unanimous jurors must find beyond a reasonable doubt that the admissible evidence was sufficient to meet every legal element of a charge. That must not be, and it cannot be, the standard that elected representatives are held to. It cannot be that if you are not convicted of a crime, your ethics are okay. Now, in order to do this, we must set an example for ourselves. We must establish guardrails around our own conduct as elected officials. Take, for example, stock trading by members of Congress. I've been in Congress about 2.5 years, and I'm confident that I have not received a single piece of confidential information through my official duties that would have helped me play the market. But it doesn't matter, because simply the appearance of receiving confidential information is more than enough to raise questions about whether that information was used in connection with trading stocks by members for their own personal gain. Again, using their official duties for their personal benefit. And that's simply why members of Congress should not be permitted to buy and sell individual stocks. Now, when I came into Congress, I sold all my individual stocks and I put my money in a blind trust. But that should be the norm, not the exception. We must pass a law prohibiting individual stock trading by members of Congress, and we can set that example for ourselves. And I know from experience how the infiltration of distrust because of stock trading by Congress can have an indelible impact. My financial advisors have not traded a single stock for well over 2 years. And I still receive allegations of insider trading all the time. So once it has started, it is very hard to roll it back. Now, there are other things that we can and need to do to restore trust in our democracy and in our elected officials. We have to eliminate big money in politics. At a minimum, there must be full transparency in campaign finance. That idea, that concept, does not violate Citizens United, the Supreme Court opinion that held that campaign finance is akin to First Amendment speech and is therefore protected. You can protect campaign finance investment while making sure that it is fully transparent. No more dark money. Sunlight is always the best disinfectant. We must set clear rules and guidelines on gifts and conflicts of interest. And importantly, there must be consequences for violating them. Similarly, we can no longer trust that our elected officials, especially our president, will view the plain language of the Constitution as binding. So we must pass legislation that not only creates an enforcement vehicle for things such as the Emoluments Clause, or such as the Hatch Act, which prevents using your official position for personal campaign purposes. And there are many other laws of ethics and rules that do not have enforcement mechanisms. And those enforcement mechanisms must not only be created, but there must be consequences to violations. I believe that we must draft legislation now to codify the independence of the Department of Justice from any personal influence of the president or those around him. President Trump has eviscerated the public integrity section, the traditionally independent and apolitical section that oversees all public corruption investigations from the Department of Justice. He's fired many apolitical and upstanding career prosecutors and law enforcement agents because they did their job by investigating him. He has issued executive orders directing the FBI to investigate his political enemies. This all must be addressed and clearly prohibited. This is the stuff of banana republics, not a constitutional republic. And finally, we need to rewrite federal public corruption law, which I am in the process of working on right now. The Supreme Court has repeatedly urged Congress to revise the Honest Services Fraud Statute. And now that I'm in Congress, I plan to take them up on their suggestion. Every branch of government, from the elected officials to the prosecutors and law enforcement agents and to the judges, must have a clear and uniform understanding of what is and is not official corruption. But restoring faith in our system is going to take more than these specific and tangible legislative objectives. We can't predict every possible ethics violation or potential corrupt deal. The voters, you, the people, must have higher expectations for their elected officials. And you must hold them accountable through the political process as well. Now, as Ben said, I ran for Congress in many respects to preserve and protect our democracy because I was incredibly fearful of what I saw coming from the reemergence of Donald Trump and the House Republicans in particular. I am determined to ensure that the rule of law remains our nation's guiding light. And I believe that if we are honest with the public, we are accountable in our actions, we hold our own party accountable, and we are uncompromising in what we expect of ourselves and courageous in our convictions, we can restore the trust that has been lost. And we can at least get that survey over 30%. But that work starts at the core with basic integrity. It starts with elected officials doing the right thing, not necessarily the easy thing. And it starts with a willingness to look the American public in the eye, to admit the fault of those we share this awesome responsibility with, and to pledge that we can, we must, and we will do better. History is watching us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Goldman. We'll take a few audience questions. There's 2 microphones here. We don't have time for a big crowd. As you might expect, the Congressman has a tight schedule, but a few at each microphone, please. And just a reminder, as you get up to the microphone, please just ask a question, no speeches, so we can get a few people in. Thank you. Please.
Danny G., thank you for that speech. Just 2 things. A, if MSG falls in your district, you think it's possible you can close it down so we can accommodate Penn Station, so we can further rebuild Penn Station? And B, consider running for president in 2028 and possibly 2032.
Less likely comment.
Yeah, I'll appreciate that. Thank you. MSG is not, and Penn Station are not in my district, but I view the lines, as Ben said, we had a massive redistricting in 2022. And especially in a place like New York City, the district lines are very arbitrary. And I view the city as my district because whether something is north of 14th Street or south of 14th Street doesn't make a huge difference in terms of the future of the city. I will just say that I think that there's an ongoing but very important debate that relates to the mayoral race, that relates to the Democratic Party, which is how are we going to govern? And there are many ideals and values that I share with many in the party in terms of giving everyone access to the opportunity to pursue the American dream at its core. That is what I think government should do. But what is happening is that too many in our party are making perfect the enemy of the good. And it is too easy to get to no and too hard to get to yes. And one thing I think we all have to recognize is the framers created a system of government that requires compromise. Now, on the national level, it's compromise between Republicans and Democrats. But on the local level, it's compromise between different viewpoints, different places on the spectrum of the Democratic Party. And I would urge all of my colleagues to recognize that we are not going to overthrow the current system immediately, that progress is incremental, but the essential word that is the root of progressive is progress. And far too often, we are not making progress with what are so-called progressive stances. And I very much have progressive values. I want to help lift up those who structurally have not had the same access to opportunity, and the haves and the have-nots are becoming more and more separated, and we have to affect that. But we don't have to tear down people who have achieved the American dream and people who have worked hard and succeeded. And in fact, if we are also lifting them up, then we're lifting everybody up. We're creating jobs. We're broadening the tax base. We are providing more funding, more opportunity for those people who have not had it. And so I think that fundamentally, from our party's perspective, we need to redouble our efforts to make progress, even if it is not perfect.
Yes. Thank you, Congressman. That was a very enlightening presentation. My name's Jennifer Joyce, proud alumna of this school. I have a two-part question. The first part is, do you anticipate impeachment proceedings beginning in the near future? And if not, why not? The second part is, do you anticipate that President Trump will leave office peacefully when his term is up?
Both are good questions. I can tell you there will be no impeachment investigation until at least January of 2027. The Republicans are in total control of both houses of Congress. It is bewildering to me that people would seek a job that requires them to travel across the country away from their families just to go to that job and give away all their own power. But that is what the Republicans are doing. And they're so complicit in Donald Trump's usurpation of all power that in this recent big ugly bill, they snuck in a clause that actually makes it more difficult for courts to enforce their own opinions. So it's not only that they're giving away their own authority, they're also trying to take away the third branch of government's authority, the judiciary, to make it harder for them to be the check and balance. So there will be no impeachment investigation while Republicans are in control. If we flip the House, which I hope and expect that we will, in November 2026, there's no question that there will be a lot of investigations. We have to expose the misconduct. We are getting no cooperation from this government. The Republicans are not demanding any of it. I write letters and make requests for information that I'm quite confident, if they are read, go straight in the garbage can. And I don't have subpoena authority, so I can't compel compliance. But there's no question that we will aggressively investigate. I don't know whether it will lead to impeachment. I think there is a valid purpose for impeachment investigations, but not because I think it's really a form that can hold a president accountable anymore, because I just don't think you're ever, put it this way, if you're not going to get a conviction for January 6th in the Senate, what are you going to get a conviction for? And it's become so tribal, so partisan, that it's hard to imagine getting 2/3 of the Senate. But the investigation itself, I think, is very important. And I believe that the fact that we exposed Donald Trump's conduct as it related to Ukraine back in 2019 played a role in the election in 2020. And that's that is the role of providing that sunlight, that transparency that Congress can and should play. Wait, I forgot your second question.
The second question was, do you anticipate President Trump leaving peacefully when his term is up?
I don't know. Last fall, he, once again, after he was elected, started, quote, joking about a third term. And a couple days after that, I introduced a resolution simply reaffirming the plain language of the Constitution, which says that no president can serve more than 2 terms. And I was kind of chided by those in the media as, oh, I'm taking him too seriously, taking him literally. He was just joking. But I have a lot of experience with Donald Trump, and I understand his MO, and I knew he wasn't joking. And what ultimately then, of course, as always happens, he throws the trial balloon, gets outraged, then some sycophantish Republican introduces a resolution to support his outlandish idea, and it becomes normalized. This is what happened with self-pardons. In 2018, when he first mentioned the idea of self-pardoning, people were outraged that how could you possibly pardon yourself? By the time the 2024 election came around, everyone had simply accepted the fact that if he won, he would not be prosecuted, whether it be by self-pardon or what the Department of Justice ended up doing in dismissing the case because of its own policies. I don't think there's going to be, I don't think Donald Trump is going to run for election for a third term. But what I think he is doing is he is trying to normalize the idea of him serving a third term. And he is trying to methodically undermine all of the institutions of our democracy so that by 2028, his end goal is to come up with some reason why there can't be an election and why he has to stay president. Like something like President Zelensky, who has said that Ukraine should not have elections until the war is over. Or some bogus invasion that's happening, you know, because people are seeking asylum across the border. He'll come up with some reason why there can't be an election. I don't think he's running for an election, and I just don't know how much traction that's going to get.
Before you go, nobody else get up, please. We'll try to do these 4 and then the. Please.
Good morning, Congressman. Back to the theme on which you were addressing the audience. That is public corruption. You must feel, the question is, do you feel lonely? Because we haven't heard any messaging whatsoever, if I'm not mistaken, from the not inconsiderable Democratic minority in the House or from the Senate or from the DNC or from the party as a whole on the issues in which you're speaking. So are you crying in the wilderness?
I do think there's been a number of us who have been addressing it. The difficulty that we have, I think, from the minority right now is there is such an overwhelming flood of misconduct and lawlessness coming from this administration. And there's a balance between making sure that we are exposing it, but also making sure that we're breaking through. And there's no way to break through on 20 issues. So we have to be, I think, somewhat strategic and thoughtful about where we focus our attention. Most urgent and most immediate right now is this big bill, because it's going to have a drastic impact on millions of Americans. It is going to increase wealth inequality tremendously. It is going to hurt everyday Americans, and it is going to help billionaires. And one, I think a lesson from last election is that even though I talked about democracy, I talked about the rule of law, I talked about Project 2025, all of which the broad American public agreed with my concern, but they did not have the luxury of voting based on those concerns because they were worried about inflation. They were worried about paying their rent. They were worried about eating. They were worried about the cost of healthcare. And understandably, they were worried about making ends meet every month. And so what we need to do is make sure that whatever we're talking about, whether it be Medicaid cuts or food stamp reductions or corruption, that we make it tangible for the average American, that we figure out how to connect and relate the broader problem to their individual lives. It's harder to do that with corruption and democracy issues than it is with pocketbook issues, because you can't lie about the cost of eggs. People feel that. And so the challenge we have is both stopping some of the worst aspects of this administration, but while also emphasizing the massive system-wide structural risk that we are going through right now, and make people understand that the impact of that is going to be much greater than the impact of the latest tariff.
Thank you so much for your integrity and standing up and exposing, especially the eroding of the checks and balances that we see going on. I'm Patrick Hall. I'm a small business owner here in District 10, a block away from the law school. Considering the fragile state of the small business economy and the proposals that threaten to cut back key public support programs while deepening economic inequality, especially between small businesses and large businesses, how can Congress proactively support small businesses as a vital engines of growth and economic opportunity?
You raise something I focus on all the time. And it actually is an area of a decent amount of bipartisanship. There was perhaps the only substantive bipartisan bill that got through the House last term was a tax bill that would have extended tax benefits for research and development, including to small businesses, and that also included increasing the low-income housing tax credit and a couple of other tax subsidies that would have helped, working Americans. That the R&D credit, of course, would also help large companies and big corporations. But I do think that we have to be focused on small businesses. With the tariffs, I focus a tremendous amount on small businesses because the impact on small businesses of the tariff tax and the trade war is much greater than on the big businesses that can withstand some, ebbs and flows. You look at Chinatown, for example, littered, really fundamentally built by small businesses. A lot of their goods, of course, are imported from China. Those businesses cannot afford the price increases, and their customers cannot afford if the price increases are passed through. And so I spend a lot of time trying to think of more creative ways to incentivize and subsidize small business growth. I've been very involved with the PACE Small Business Development Committee. I don't know exactly what it is, but they have a very robust and free sort of small business services unit that provides lots of resources and information. And what I find is a lot of small businesses just don't know about the programs that are accessible to them. And so a lot of what I feel like my job is to amplify the opportunities, both on a federal level, but also on a local level. And that we have to continue to support small businesses, which are, really the lifeblood of New York.
May I also say about that, I saw you at the SBDC financial panel the other day down at Pace University, and then there's also the that's all supported by the SBA, but the SBA hasn't been recertified by Congress since George Bush was president, and they've cut 43% of the workforce. So try getting anyone on the phone at the SBA. So there's a lot more that can be
Yeah,
done.
I mean, it's true for every agency. And, just to address that for a second, you will hear over and over again that, oh, we're just streamlining, we're making it more efficient, we're just focused on staff, we're not focused on benefits. If you cut so much staff that you can't distribute the benefits, you are cutting benefits.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a citizen, just a voter. Sort of integrating the last two questions. So we're now at a point where the courts have ruled in hundreds of cases, maybe a couple hundred, that what Trump has been doing since the beginning, including touching any budget, which is not the president's job, is illegal. And we have a stack of court cases against the administration. And, we have no historical precedent for a president ever being sued as much as this president has been and being found wrong as much. Who figures out what to do with all those court cases to compel the administration to follow the courts, which they are not doing, and just those decisions seem to be sitting, in the air. And it feels terrifying, of course. Whose job is it? I mean, is anyone working on that? Like, what do you think?
So that to me is the cliff, is if Donald Trump openly says that he's defying a Supreme Court order, we've crossed the Rubicon, because the Republicans, as I said, have completely ceded their responsibility and obligation to be a check and a balance in Congress. And so it is up to the courts. There was I thought, a very interesting opinion yesterday from a Reagan appointee up in Massachusetts, who noted that, who calling out blatant discrimination in the policies that were implemented by the president. And he made a point of saying, this is the task I have, and lifetime tenure insulates me from the political pressure. But it is not the same for those who are amenable to political influence and political pressure. And he expressed real concern that the bullying tactics, the threats, and the personal security issues that are getting worse and worse for elected representatives can have a meaningful impact on how our elected representatives do their jobs. And that's when democracy fails. And there have been plenty of reports about people changing their votes because of personal or family security problems. That is a real problem. I will say that I don't think we've gotten to that cliff yet. I think Donald Trump has skirted a number of orders. I think he has violated them, but he has not outright and openly declared that he is defying them. And I think there's a difference between him saying that he's complying and maneuvering around them, even if you and I think that he's violating them, and outright just saying, I am no longer listening to the courts. And so we'll see. I think there's a process for enforcing these court orders that escalates. And I think that it's very hard for any lawyer go stand in front of a court knowing that that lawyer's client is not following a court order, and the contempt can be executed against that lawyer, and that lawyer can actually suffer. And I think what I found with the impeachment is that the high-level political appointees didn't care about the blowback of defying a subpoena. But the true patriots, who are the career officials who are doing the work every day and whose integrity and reputation was on the line, cared very much about congressional subpoenas. And I suspect that a lot of the lawyers, the career lawyers who have to go into court and have their bar license on the line as to whether or not they are going to be honest with the court, are going to have a different approach than Donald Trump might have.
Thanks, Congressman. I'm Steve Browdegam, recently retired environmental attorney from city government. I have a FEMA-related question on your topic. Last week, President Trump announced that he plans to shut down the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and handle disbursements through the White House after the hurricane season this next fall. Do you see the potential for corruption in an approach like that? Thank you.
I don't think you'll be surprised with my answer. Yeah, and the other thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is, and is normalized in many respects, is the degree to which Donald Trump uses his official power and official authority in a purely partisan way. So if you are a blue state, he's not going to give you the emergency funding. If you are a red state, he's happy to give it to you. I think this administration is in for a very, very rude awakening during this hurricane season. They have really eviscerated the core foundation and functioning of FEMA, and the states are not in any position to be able to take on those roles. Oddly enough, the states that are best prepared to do that would be New York and California. And the states that are least prepared to do that would be, your Mississippi, your Alabama, your southern states that will be in the path of some hurricane this season. And, Republicans always object to federal funding, until they need it. And then they come begging. And so it's not even just the funding in this case, it's the infrastructure, the organization, the response mechanisms, the logistics. FEMA is very, very good at reacting quickly to emergency situations, saving lives, making sure that the damage is assessed and then remediated. And they're going to be in for a rude awakening this hurricane season. And it's unfortunate because people are going to die because of their ineptitude and their incompetence. And I don't take that lightly. I'm not celebrating the fact that they're going to reap what they have sown. And but sometimes you need to have that experience in order to have an actual impact on people. You need to take away what they expect in order for them to appreciate what they have gotten used to. And so it's a major problem. I'm sure that the president will wield the power of his purse in a partisan way, but you can't just fund logistics and organization, and that's what FEMA does very well, and that's what they're not going to be able to do this hurricane season. I've got to go, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Dean Crowell. It's great. Really appreciated the conversation. Take care.
Thanks for being here, everybody. Stay tuned for more events and take care.